There we go. All right, perfect. So you should be seeing an intro slide. So we're going to go through some just basic, relatively basic tips and tricks. Is going to be my presentation. It's going to be, I'm actually going to try to do this as more of a continuation series to some degree. So it's all going to be kind of touching base on this larger problem. And in this case, it's a CFD. We did some different things made it kind of interesting that I thought people might want to see. But today is going to be kind of a basic portion of it, just editing models quickly using some direct modeling and everything. So I think I talk a little bit more out in that in the next slide. But so looking at how I would basically prep this model for doing something like a CFD using basic model editing, or maybe even prepping beyond prepping it, say the customer comes back with changes, but you're only dealing with imported bodies. So rather than like being able to just edit your, feature tree easily, having to deal with imported bodies. So that is what I'm going to go over. Now I'm going to switch to SolidWorks, and it's going to definitely work seamlessly. We're all convinced. All right, put that over there. Oh, this is going to be interesting. I just realized. Hold on. Let me switch this up. I need to. Sorry, 1 second. Everyone on Zoom, let's change it. Okay. No, sorry, PowerPoint's taken over. I need to tell it to stop so I can see better. Okay. Now we're in SolidWorks. I'm going to probably just do most of it in SolidWorks so I don't keep dealing with switch back and forth, because that was more painful than I realized. All right, so we're going to do some direct model editing. So in this case, what I've gotten is a imported body. I don't have a feature tree. This was actually done, for the record, in Fusion 360. So I know this is SolidWorks user group, but this was actually done in Fusion. However, we were doing some analysis in SolidWorks, and what I wanted to do was do a couple things to clean it up. So one of the things that was causing me problems are these ports. I believe these were for injectors. They're just kind of in my way, and for analysis purposes, it doesn't really matter. So what I'm going to do is I could boss extrude and do some different features to overcome this, but instead what I'm going to do is just delete face these away. And I always just search for the feature because I use it sporadically, so I don't have it in my direct feature tree. But I can do something like this and just delete that feature away, rather than trying to deal with boss extrudes at weird angles that cover things up or anything like that, or messing with geometry. So now I did that one just as an example. Now I can just go through and do all of these. Oops, put them in the wrong spot. Do all of these in the same feature. So I'm getting all of this done in one feature and just basically closing up that gap. There's other ways, obviously, we could do it, but I want to show you how to use delete face, so that's how I'm doing it. Let's say this flange is also kind of getting in my way. Again, could maybe boss extrude it, or I'm sorry, cut extrude it away. But there might be reasons I don't want to. With the other thing, a lot of people forget, there's a great tool called split. So in this case, I'm just going to select that face, tell it to split it. And part of the reason, sorry, that you might not want to cut it away is I might want it there for reference. So I don't want to cut the geometry away, but I don't want it to interfere with some other things I'm going to be doing. I just want it there as a visual reference. So if I split it, so now I've got two bodies, I can keep both of them. That's what I have here now, but I can just hide that one. It's a separate body. And just like that, now I have this all cleaned up for that. Now that I've got my geometry, I've got a pretty clean fluid path. Now what I want to do is create that internal volume for the CFD. Again, there's a few ways to do that. I'm sure some of you here would tell me a bunch of different ways, but I'm going to use this way. I found it to be probably the most bulletproof of all the ways I've dealt with. So essentially what I'm going to do is just boss extrude a oversized block. Doesn't really matter how oversized it is. The only thing that really matters is this line is on this edge, and I'll explain why in just a second. But I'm basically just going to extrude this block. Through. Again, doesn't really matter even how far I'm going here. The main thing I want to do is not merge result. I want this to be a separate body. So now that I have this separate body, what I'm going to do, well, actually, I'm going to do one more thing. I'm also going to do a move copy body. Since I've got dummy geometry, this is an easy way to create duplicate geometry if you're, depending on what you're dealing with here. And in this case, what I want to do is use my move copy body, select the manifold or the intake. Anyway, then in this case, so the menu I didn't want. We're just going to go to translate, rotate. I'm going to say create copy, but I'm not actually going to move it. So I'm just creating a copy of that geometry, which will give me this extra body in the model. So now I'm going to take that. Actually, I'm going to do another, and I tend to search for my commands that I'm using. So I'm going to search for combine. I'm going to combine using, the tool is combine, but in this case, I'm using the subtract portion of the tool. There's different ways to use combine. So I'm using the combine to subtract, which is a little bit of a confusing turn of phrase, and essentially what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, I want to keep, this is my main body, and I want to subtract the intake from this block, which essentially will leave remaining the internal geometry that I want. So if I take that and then I select for the intake, now what I should get, all goes according to plan, is these two bodies. This exterior block, which I don't really care about, that's just all the geometry that's going to go away. And I get this interior kind of fluid path, essentially. So now if I were to add some color so you can see it a little better. I've got a body there that represents my fluid flow, and I've done it all, very quickly and in the model rather than using some other tool. Again, I find that tool works pretty well for me as a more robust tool that doesn't break under certain conditions, which I find a lot of other methods tend to break. So now that I've got my fluid flow here, fluid path, this is really just not helpful. The actual intake geometry is really just what I'm using to get the thing I want, which is the fluid flow. So for now, that's mostly what we're going to just be focusing on now, is this. And I think I've got a weird graphical glitch. There we go. Now it's good. Okay. So now I've got my fluid flow. I'm ready for CFD. Essentially, at this point, I could imply inputs, outputs, and all kinds of stuff. But what if the customer says, you know what, actually, we decided we want to move that intake over a little bit. Well, I have imported geometry. I can't move it over a little bit. But maybe I can using some of the direct modeling tools. So in this case, I'm going to pull up my old friend delete face again. And what I'm going to do is get rid of these fillets. And maybe the customer says, those fillets are too big. We don't have the tooling. It's causing us problems too. So we're going to delete those fillets for a couple of reasons. One, because we want to change them. And one, because if we want to move some stuff around, fillets cause problems. That's why I always recommend, if it is a SolidWorks model, you put your fillets at the end of the model. That's where fillets belong. General rule, there are exceptions as to any rule, but ideally your fillets are always at the end of the model. So now if we use our old friend delete face, if I've done this correctly, and this is a real model, I didn't just create this for demo purposes. So while I did check that some of this would work, these are actual methods I would possibly use on a real life model. So they do work not just in demo purposes. It's still solid. Yeah, that's a great question. Yeah, so he was asking, when I deleted the faces, it didn't just make it a surface, it still left it as a body. And that's a great point. I'll let you know why. I didn't just delete, I delete and patch. So thank you for bringing that up, because I meant to point it out earlier. So delete and patch will do its best to interpolate the geometry and basically clean edge fillet, kind of square the edges the way we would want. Delete face, I could do this real quick, will give you a nightmare model that now you got to fix. You don't want to fix that. Now, delete patch doesn't always work. So there have been times that you might do a delete and then use surfacing to refix your model. If whenever possible, I don't want to do that. No one wants to do that, but you may have to at some point. Delete and fill does something similar to patch, but it does it in, I don't know what the actual like math behind it is on what SolidWorks is doing, but it creates a much weirder fill. It doesn't do as clean a cut like delete and patch. So delete and patch is really the go-to basically when you do that delete phase. So we're gonna get our now nicely squared off. Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I'm gonna change the color here so this is easier to see. Absolutely. I'll use a more pastel color. Let's usually pop a little better. Maybe a bright pink. Does that look better? A little easier? Okay, good. The light blue is better? Okay, I'll go with light blue. All right, perfect. So now that we've got that delete face, there's a couple things we can do. One, we could reapply the fillets, but if we wanted to, let's say the customer, like I said, needs to move one of these, not just reapply the fillet. Now, instead of delete face, I'm going to use move face. I'm just going to select all of these faces, and the select tool is going to get in my way. I'm going to do it manually, mostly because if I'm being honest, I don't trust the select tool. 9 times out of 10, it doesn't give me what I want. That's entirely a personal opinion. But if it's just a handful of faces, I usually find that I'm going to be better off just selecting them myself. So now I can just grab all of these faces and hypothetically, there we go. I just didn't drag it properly. Move that over. And I could select any of these. Maybe I want to move that one over 20. Actually, I'm going to move it over 10. Number. And you can just drag if you're looking for some position, or you can use parameters here as well. I'm just going to drag it over 10. But now we've got the same geometry, but that moved over a little. And I can move other ones, but in this case, I don't need to. And then I can just reapply my fillets. Before we had a much larger fillet. I don't remember what it was, but now we're just going to go with like a 3mm fillet. Maybe the customer has tooling to create this better. So now we've been able to, we created our internal flow, we fully edited it, and now can iterate and do another round of CFD, or maybe we did the setup on the first one, this is our second run, or we want to batch multiple runs, and we could create, we can do this in configurations, which actually Gary's going to talk more about configurations. We could do this in configurations, so we have 10 different configurations, all with a little tweak, and then maybe run them in batch series so we can see, oh, okay, well, I got better performance when I ran this configuration versus this configuration. Yeah. So, now, make this airflow change. Oh, good question. Yeah. So the original model, the original imported. Yeah. So the question is the original model still there? Yes, the original model, if I'm understanding your question correctly, is still there. I can roll back and go back to the original model. It's all, everything's still there. This is just an additive or new things. Yeah, so we can always go back. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so we're just making smart features on a dumb model. Exactly. Yeah. True. Yes, you could. Yeah, if you wanted to have more of a link between models and using interlink or interconnect, you could have more of a connection between original models. In this case, we don't often. To be honest, I've actually never used interconnect. I know it theoretically exists, but I've never used it. We always end up getting outputs of steps or something. Sometimes it's because they don't like sharing models. They want it as a dumb solid. There's other reasons I don't know, but yeah, in this case, we just have an imported solid. The one other thing I want to show, oh yeah, the other thing we can do, which I think is interesting, I want to give you a scale, an idea on the scale tool, is kind of a fun one that I think people maybe don't use as often. Maybe they use it a lot. I don't know. I know we, every once in a while, we're able to solve, a lot of hours rather than going through and changing something massive, or maybe the customer just wants to know, we are going to have to change it more accurately later. But if I want to just roughly quantify, what if I made this 10% smaller or 1% smaller? How would that affect things? Like without having to spend 200 hours in engineering time or whatever it might be to fully redesign it. Well, in this case, I can just take this scale tool and let's say I actually just want to scale it 1% in the X direction, 2% the Y direction, 1% Z direction. I can just run that. And there's different ways to scale it about different axes if it matters, but for this case, it doesn't really matter. It's just isolated. But that feature that you just get, yeah. So you can suppress it, it'll go right back. Exactly. Yeah. So the question being whether I can just suppress the feature and go back to what it is, and I absolutely can. Yeah, that's all. All of these features can be configured or done in different ways, so you still have your original. So now I've got, if we want to look at the original, for example, what I've done hasn't even taken away this original body here. So it's actually still here. And let me change it so it's not transparent. Well, I failed at that. Let's try that one more time. What did I do? Change the transparency elsewhere. Okay. So now you can see this is now the fluid path compared to what the fluid path was before. We're a little smaller. This one shifted over. And you can really see it here, there's a little bit of an air gap. So in different axes, we've now shrunk down. So this is just an example if you wanted to run it a little smaller without having to spend hours changing your model. Again, maybe you're just trying to get a rough number because they're like, well, I want it to be 2 or 3% smaller. Well, let's just run the numbers real quick. And then we can go through and do all the hard part rather than spending all the time doing the hard part before you know what the answer is. I think that is all I wanted to show. So I just wanted to go through some direct editing. I didn't ever switch back to my PowerPoint. Create a huge headache for you guys. So I'm just going to quickly go through these. It was just a couple of slides. But the first thing I showed you was that move face and delete face and the split. So just modeling using that direct editing rather than trying to do like boss extrudes or having a design tree. Creating your internal fluid flow geometry using that kind of subtractive combined method. And then making model changes by using delete face and move bodies and stuff. You can kind of do some interesting stuff with that. So my summary here is essentially imported geometry can still be useful, more useful than you might imagine. A lot of times we, say, hey, I got a step file. There's nothing I can do here, guy. But there's quite a bit you can do, depending on what the customer needs. If it was a totally different shaped object at a certain point, it's like, nah, we should add it to the model. But there are things you can do, and you can save time by iterating quickly using some smart tools like this. Sometimes we've all probably inherited models from other people. Maybe they associated something to a hole that doesn't need to exist anymore, and it's gonna just wreck your model to try and get rid of that hole by normal methods of doing suppressing or something, or maybe it's hours of work. I don't know. We've all seen weird things, right? Maybe you just delete face. Maybe, you know, it's not the perfect solution, but if it's something you need quick just to get it out the door, you know, we can always come back and fix it later. So, yeah.
Yeah, what was the purpose of doing the copy step? And then you've got you know, a copy of the one body.
Yeah.
I've used subtract before, but I don't remember having to do a copy.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I can show you. Really, the only reason, the only reason, and the question is, why did I do a copy before I did this combine? And the only reason, truly, is that at the end of it, I want one body still there. So I still want to see this. If I didn't care about seeing that or having that as reference, I don't need to do that.
Okay.
Yeah. It's really just I wanted two of them so I could still see one of them. Yeah. So all I did was make a duplicate, because otherwise that body gets consumed in the combine. It doesn't exist anymore. So that's why there's not two of these in here anymore. There's just these bodies here. And I still have that original flange here as well, even though I split it off to get it out of my way because it didn't matter for me. So still sitting there. Perfect. Well, that was my presentation. Yeah, any other questions? Yeah. Yeah. No, that's okay. I probably went perfectly. Let me show you. So the question is, how did I get this flange? I believe you're talking about this, right?
It was not the leaf face part, but that how you.
Oh, this. How did I get that to split off? Yeah, let me go back to that. Sorry, you were talking about that guy. Hide this for now. Yes, it's split 4. So essentially, the split command, all I'm doing in this case is selecting this face with the split command and telling it to cut the body there. So it's kind of like doing a cut extrude, except it doesn't consume anything. Yeah. Yeah. No, I'm glad to hear that. I mean, that's partly why I'm going to go over it. It's actually a really useful tool. Sometimes we'll use it because we want to edit a particular part without affecting this geometry. So we'll maybe split off this part of the geometry, do some editing, and then recombine it. Because there might be something that if you try and change this over here, it screws this up. But if you cut them away, they won't affect each other, and then you can recombine them later.
Would it sort of take that face and I think what's kind of hard to.
Yeah.
So the whole thing is highlighted, like the entire part gets.
Oh yeah, it's a little hard to differentiate. Yeah.
Face and like cuts that direction normal to it and just gets rid of that.
It's kind of like putting a plane. It's using that face basically as a plane, and it's like guillotine with 0 curve. It's just saying this is split right here, and there's no curve to it, but there's in terms of like thickness, but it's just separating.
Yeah, I got you.
Yeah. Yeah, excellent question. Yeah. Yeah, you got a question. Yeah. 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 So a good example of that, I'm trying to think of unfortunately, I don't have, I wasn't prepared with like a perfect example of what I just, I just brought up, but an example you could bring up, actually, I take that back. I almost showed this. So let me show. Yeah, let me show a way you could do that. If I hide this real quick. So if instead what I did here was a move face, which is totally fine and worked, what you could also do is actually split face with a circular face to be a more kind of advanced split. So let me show a quick example of that. And if I wanted to cut this body on that circular face, it's now going to give me these all as separate bodies. So if for some reason, and the reason I bring that up, I wanted, they're all now separate bodies because of that split tool. So these are all individual bodies now. So what I can do then is, what if I wanted to kind of, I don't know, put a weird kind of scallop on this model or something? I guess I could just do it. If I just wanted to put a, now I wouldn't have been able to put this kind of just scallop into the model without affecting the other geometry before, right? Because it was all connected there. It was connected to the main body, but now I could cut this away. And let me unhide some of the stuff I did, not that one. And now I could recombine. Yeah. So now instead we're going to use combine again, but we're going to use add instead of subtract, because all I'm going to do is combine these all back to one body at the end. Sorry, this one actually we didn't want. And now this is back to being one body, but with that scallop in it. And adding that scallop where it didn't cut this other part would have been really difficult before, right? Because it was all, but now I've got a scallop that goes straight through that body, but because I split it, cut it, and then put it back together, I was able to create that geometry. So yeah, really good question. Yeah.
What you're doing here with these direct edit,
Yeah.
actually, in my opinion,
Mm-hmm.
that is the third way to edit any part after it's been used.
That's a very good
And
point.
The reason for that is the challenge after a part has been released. It's not editing. It's not changing anything else.
Yeah, that you didn't mean to change. Yeah.
So you can go with a direct edit feature and move a hole. Okay, it's a feature, and you can say position A. Now you've got one model that's got position A, suppress it, it's the original, and then you can bring your whole revision history by little direct edits, and you don't have the liability of trying to go in a model you don't understand and change a parameter and get it down.
Yeah.
See what I mean?
Yeah, you bring up a really good point, and just to repeat it for the Zoom audience also, is this is a really effective and maybe preferred way of editing the model after release, because you're essentially not inadvertently changing something you don't mean to, because a lot of times with SolidWorks models, a lot of us will know, there's something connected, as I kind of stated before, there might be something connected to that hole that you don't realize, and somebody just says, hey, I need to move that hole over 2 millimeters. You go, okay, I know how to edit a model, I'll just change the dimension by 2 millimeters. However, when you do that, it might change the gasket and some gasket path and some other stuff. So if instead you did a move face, like I just did here for these holes, for example, which is why I did that real quick. If you move these over 2 millimeters, or in this case 3 millimeters, you haven't affected anything else beyond what you expected to. Everything you see here being moved is the only things being moved. Yeah, that's a very good point.